Welcome back to Inside Look, an Inside Ambition segment where we take a deep dive into something happening here at Drexel. I'm Alexandra George. Today marks the beginning of a brand new month. You guessed it, it's February. February is by far the best month of the year because not only is it my birth month, but it's also the birth month of the likes of Rihanna, Trevor Noah, and Elmo, each of who I idolize equally. But perhaps the most important part about February is that it celebrates Black history. In the city of Philadelphia and all across the country, we take the time this month to celebrate the achievements and reflect upon the history of African Americans. As author James Baldwin once said, growing up with an American education, he was, quote, bugged by the teaching of American history because it seemed that history had been taught without cognizance of his presence. Education is a major part of Black History Month. Speaking of, let me let you in on a little secret about the institution that's educating all of us. Drexel is a PWI, or a predominantly white institution, that was named after, you guessed it, a white man. But Drexel has been making some progress in creating opportunities on campus to learn more about Black culture and explore topics about race. One program in particular whose mission it is to educate the Drexel community is the brand new CBC, or Center for Black Culture. Now let's take an inside look. Black History Month is an effort to try and rewrite the whitewashed version of history most of us were and continue to be taught. This country was built on the backs of Black Americans, and they deserve all the credit in the world. Even though we have a Black History Month, it is clear to see that this is nowhere near enough. We are in the midst of yet another civil rights movement in this country because of the sheer amount of civil wrongs that we continue to perpetuate. The history of Black History Month is as follows. The tradition of having a month to honor Black Americans dates all the way back to 1915, 50 years after slavery had been abolished. It started off as Black History Week, which was the second week of February to coincide with the birthdays of President Abraham Lincoln and American abolitionist Frederick Douglass. And get this, due to the Civil Rights Movement of 1960, Black History Week turned into Black History Month, and it all started on college campuses. You heard that right. We have the power, people. The movement got so big at universities that President Gerald Ford officially recognized Black History Month in 1976. Since then, every president has designated February as Black History Month and endorsed a specific theme for it each year. Last year's theme was African Americans and the Vote, which clearly made an impact just taking a look at the work of Stacey Abrams and hundreds of other organizers. And this year's theme is the Black family, representation, identity, and diversity. The themes associated with Black History Month foster crucial conversation, a conversation that seems to have finally made it to Drexel's campus. In response to the death of George Floyd and the events of this past summer, Drexel created the Center for Black Culture, which officially opened on November 12th of 2020. Virtually, that is. But before we talk about the progress, let's all remember that the National Guard was housed in Drexel's armory while throngs of protesters made their way through campus. But hey, on the plus side, images of Drexel's campus went viral when TikTokers were twerking to the BLM chants. So I think it all evens out in the long run. The CBC aims to increase knowledge, recognition, and respect of the people, histories, and cultures of the African diaspora and its many contributions to the world. All programs and services offered through the CBC are open to members of the Drexel community. That's fancy language for you don't have to be Black to get involved. And to be honest, if you think that this isn't a worthwhile program or something that matters to you personally, then you should probably sign up for some of their events ASAP. The center will serve as a resource for the university community to gain a greater understanding of the Black experience and support a welcoming and wholly inclusive campus environment. One can't help but be reminded with this edition of the blunder President Fry made back in August with his statement discussing the shooting of Jacob Blake, in which his email headline read, quote, "Police shooting renews outrage over violence against blacks." The error was quickly remedied and the message resent with an apology and the replacement of the term with Black Lives, but oof. Understandably, the student body was outraged by this mistake. It simply goes to show that there is room to grow, not only on Drexel's campus, but within the administration. It shouldn't have taken a national civil rights movement to create a center like this. Anyway, I digress. We can save the fry roasting, the fry frying, for another date. Back to the focus of today's segment, the Center for Black Culture. The initiatives outlined by the center include celebrating Black traditions, encouraging Black student leadership, strengthening Drexel's Black community, and providing a safe space to promote and encourage physical and emotional wellness. Sounds good to me, don't you think? President Fry thinks that the CBC is a step in the right direction for Drexel. As he said, "At a moment when our nation is having a long overdue reckoning with the enduring inequality rooted in a long history of racial injustice, this center is one of the many substantive steps we are taking to build a more diverse and inclusive Drexel. And we look forward to the unique role it will be able to play in the elevating and celebrating the extraordinary impact of Black culture in our campus and our city, our nation, and the world." Ooh, excuse me. I don't know if that's what his voice sounds like, but how would you know? Wow, that statement was almost as beautiful as the curvaceous silhouette of Mario at dusk when the moonlight reflects off of his scaly body. They don't call him Mario the Magnificent for nothing. Anyway, I encourage you all to get out and celebrate Black History Month as you see fit. Actually, scratch that. Black people and their accomplishments deserve to be celebrated all year round. Consider taking an Africana Studies course here at Drexel, visiting the CBC, and staying up to date with their events. Plus, you can even help to donate to support their mission. Are there any ways that you are engaging in Black History Month that we haven't mentioned? We are always looking for suggestions here at Inside Ambition. Sound off in the comments below and let us know how you are lifting up and supporting Black stories, communities, voices, and people. And as always, to stay up to date with all of our content, make sure to follow our Instagram at inside_ambition and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Hey friends, welcome back to Inside Ambition, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Main Report, the weekly news rewind so that you don't get left behind. My name is Remo, and I'm thankful that we get to share our Fridays together. On The Main Report, we have talked about heavy subject matter, and through the pain in some of the news we cover, I try to highlight it with some intention of seeking light. However, this week's episode is one that has angered the community and myself, and rightfully so. Today's episode will be much more serious, and I hope that you will come along for this ride. Let's talk about Philly Fighting COVID, the organization that is being named the Fire Festival of vaccine rollouts. Drexel psychology graduate Andre Doroshin and a group of his friends made a name for themselves since the start of the pandemic after they created reusable face shields with 3D printers and donated them to local Philadelphian hospitals. As a Drexel community, we were happy to see one of our own doing good. This group then moved on to fully founding Philly Fighting COVID, organizing as a nonprofit in April 2020 with Doroshin as the CEO. They were running pop-up testing sites in areas such as West, the Northeast, and South Philadelphia, supporting underserved communities struggling with proper access to healthcare. However, giving this a closer look, people came to learn a majority of the people involved higher up, including the CEO, had no background, much less expertise in healthcare and public health. But no one from the city seemed to find this alarming. nickname the situation a toxic relationship because having no MD on their executive vaccine team was just one of the first red flags they ignored. The organization saw personal potential in their growth and even held a raunchy rooftop meeting in October 2020. The privilege is loud and can be seen free on YouTube, actually, although it is unlisted. According to Doroshin, the juicy slide, whatever that means, was about the staff's financing plan. And yes, the facts are that the health department passed Philly Fighting COVID's paperwork and operational plans for reportedly meeting the state and federal requirements. And yes, Andre, the CEO, met with the city council in November without being questioned for any credentials in healthcare. Homie left that meeting and got a seat in the Vaccine Advisory Committee. Thus, PFC was registered as a vaccine provider with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and was given a grant. With the convention center that was designed to vaccinate between 100 to 450 people per hour and up to 4,500 people daily, they said, "Spare doses, please," and administered nearly 7,000 shots provided by the city. And red flag alert about said grant from the city. Doroshin claims the group tested 20,000 people and was awarded a grant amounting to 190,000. He claims that is 50,000 less than the city grant amount they had applied for, and the organization has returned the remaining amount to the city. However, that didn't add up. The health department spokesperson Jim Garrow said the city has only paid $111,000 for testing charges. This is where things got more questionable, as this was due to Philly Fighting COVID's submission of 3 separate invoices that were rejected due to incomplete documentation and duplicative timesheets. Said timesheets showed employees working 2 different testing sites at once. And now, the city never signed a formal contract with Philly Fighting COVID, but it did provide its unofficial sanction and publicity. And now that the history is squared away, what is happening now? On January 25, 2021, it was abruptly announced that the city of Philadelphia would be severing its ties with Philly Fighting COVID, effective immediately. This comes just 2.5 weeks after their first vaccination clinic went live. My team, alongside the entire community, was taken back and shocked at this news. This organization was such a positive name in our community, and they were supposedly leading our city's fight against COVID. So the question here is, why did they cut ties? For one, Philadelphia claimed it was Philly Fighting COVID's sudden and non-disclosed change in their privacy policy. The policy allowed for the act of selling residents' information entered into the PFC pre-registration portal. The city once instructed Philadelphians to pre-register for the vaccine in this exact way. Second, Philadelphia claimed that they were unaware of PFC's switch to a for-profit entity. Apparently, no heads up was given. In order to make a profit, Doroshin planned to accept the vaccinations from the federal government free of charge and bill the insurance companies for the distribution and injection of the vaccine at $24 a shot. As mentioned before, along with this get-rich-quick scheme, Doroshin also planned to take the data acquired from the vaccine distribution and sell it to the third-party advertisers. This would have included everything, from height and weight, to what kind of ointment your doctor prescribed you for that nasty rash you just can't seem to get rid of. The third reason was much less pronounced, but still relevant. The city pointed out that Philly Fighting COVID abruptly stopped testing, therefore the city would abruptly cut off the supply to the vaccines to their organization. So why did the city of Philadelphia agree to give the reins to an unproven 22-year-old kid? Apparently, Doroshin knocked it out of the park with his numerous PowerPoint presentations to the Philadelphia City Council. Philly Fighting COVID began submitting plans to the City Council for 5 high-capacity vaccine distribution sites that could see up to 10,000 patients a day, something very alluring to Philadelphia congresspeople looking for a perfect solution to a prevalent issue. The only form of proof that the city of Philadelphia relied on about Philly fighting COVID's credentials was the fact that they were registered as a vaccine provider with the CDC. And with a name like Philly fighting COVID, who could blame them? The name is so on the nose, so literal. How could the city of Philadelphia see this one coming? I'm going to create an organization called the Philly Fighting MLM Schemes. I am praying the city backs me up when someone slides into my DMs telling me I need hair regenerating pills after they saw my hairline when we bumped into each other at a Wegmans. Another volunteer alleged that Andre took vaccine doses for himself. Another said that there was a free-for-all, where these 18 and 19-year-old freshmen and sophomore kids were just vaccinating each other on the site. And Andre admitted on the Today Show that he in fact did take doses, stating they were going to expire. So, he took them and administered them himself to his friends. Quick reminder, no. Andre Doroshin is not in the Drexel University College of Medicine. But hey, I'm in Lebeau, and I have ambition that can't wait. I'm ready to start injecting a scarce, life-saving resource into my homie's biceps. It's like, I read stonks. Even Fry said, I don't know them, in a mass email to the Drexel community. The Dragons aren't claiming him either. And really, Andre has confirmed many of the allegations in extremely defensive ways with endless justifications. If you watch any of the interviews he has done over the course of 6 days, it is uncomfortable to say the least. In every single interview and press conference, he blames everybody but himself. And the group half apologized. They really gave their best 3 a.m. iPhone notes apology after facing backlash all over social media. Doroshin has reportedly told the staff at Philly Fighting COVID to resign earlier this week. However, he stated that he intends to keep contributing to their vaccine work. Regardless, city prosecutors are looking into these allegations to find evidence to confirm his potential criminal acts, as well as uncover more incriminating evidence. Overall, mistrust already exists in the medical field. Andre Doroshin has not made it any easier on this notion, and now national news outlets like NBC, CBS, The Washington Post, NPR, you name it, are publicizing this massive mistake. But with many people in our community needing answers, my team here on the main report wanted to seek them out. Our team had a chance to take statements from a handful of volunteers who worked with Philly Fighting COVID, and here are some of the critical takeaways. Volunteers themselves express that it feels like the city put underqualified people in charge of something so critical. Preface for this next one major rumor that was passing around was that the whole event had such dysfunction that one of the volunteers was given an empty vial of the vaccine to take home as a souvenir. One volunteer we spoke to witnessed another volunteer was given an empty vial of that vaccine to take home. They claimed that this vial had 0.4 concentration, but the vaccine requires 0.5 to be administered. Still seems off protocol and breaking some sort of rules. A separate volunteer stated that with the change in the privacy policy, while it may have been a miswording, should have not been overlooked. They described an important notion. Working in underprivileged communities and dealing with the vulnerable populations, for example, some undocumented, inappropriate privacy policies and selling data in the medical field should never have cross-mixed whatsoever. Said volunteer described this as concerning and fueled that mentioned distrust people have in medicine, thus making the fight against COVID and all medical science harder. And finally, we have reached out to Philly Fighting COVID and their PR team, but to no response or comment. So I bring these questions to you, friend. Do you think Philadelphia as a community, particularly these underdeserved communities, really trusted Philly Fighting COVID? Or do you think it's a bigger issue of scarcity and resource allocation? A little bit of something really feels like everything when you have nothing. So how do we make amends? Not only as an immunocompromised person, but someone who has lost family and friends to COVID, someone who knows people who continue to hurt deeply because of this pandemic. I am disgusted, I am heartbroken, and I am disappointed that he comes from our community. And that is all I have to say on that. So thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Main Report. Remember this week, friends, now more than ever, to be kind in all that you do and to be purposeful in all of your actions. Hindsight is 2020, and I'll see you next week, Dragons.
Welcome back to the DAC Recap, the show where we recap all things Drexel and Philadelphia sports. As always, I'm your host, Luciano Duffy. Don't forget to like and subscribe down below. Now, let's jump right into it. Our first report comes from the DAC. The men's basketball team's home-and-home versus Northeastern was postponed last weekend due to COVID complications on Northeastern's end. Instead, the Dragons rerouted their bus to James Madison, where they tipped off versus the Dukes. Cameron Winter's 29 points were not enough as the Dragons fell 73-64 last Sunday. The girls, however, handled business on the road against the Huskies of Northeastern. On Saturday, behind Hannah Nihill's 21 points, the Dragons won 79-64. On Sunday, it was Nihill again, this time hitting a go-ahead basket with just 1.6 seconds on the clock. A wise man once told me, a win is a win. The Dragons were able to sweep their co-op school rivals this weekend. This upcoming weekend, the Dragons were slated to play their homecoming games versus Hofstra. Their weekend games have since been rescheduled to a later date. The Flyers have caught a little win streak as they swept their last two opponents. First, it was the Devils, and the Flyers were able to win that road stretch with 5-3 and 3-1 victories. It was actually the Islanders who gave the Flyers a little bit of trouble. Deep into overtime, it was Scott Longton who won it for the Flyers with his goal to put them up 3-2 on the Islanders. On Sunday, it was Kevin Hayes' turn to win one for the Flyers. His overtime goal came with just 41 seconds remaining on the clock as he used the power play to his advantage. Like I said earlier, a win is a win, and the Flyers have secured 4 straight. Just like that, the Flyers are back on pace at number 1 in their division. Sexy Gritty was quickly replaced with Gritty jumping into a ball pit as he posts to Twitter with a caption of "Flip, flip, Flipadelphia." It's good to see you back, Gritty. Staying in the Wells Fargo, the 76ers had their own slate of interesting games last week. The defending champion Los Angeles Lakers came into town in what was the battle of the best Western and Eastern Conference team this season. MV Bede was having himself a night until he fell hard on what looked like to be a dirty play by LeBron James. Embiid has been dealing with back problems ever since. My only question is, how has Embiid's back not started hurting earlier for how much he's carried the 76ers over the past couple years? Regardless of Embiid's health, it was the 76ers who were determined to win. Tobias Harris was the star of the show as he had a game winner to put the Lakers away, 107-106. In their game against the Pacers, the Sixers were down as many as 20 points in the third quarter. However, the final score was 119-110 as the Sixers were able to sneak away with the W. It came from a great defensive effort in the fourth quarter for the Sixers, as they only allowed 15 points in that quarter alone. They held Indiana to making only 29% of their shots from the floor. On the offensive side of the ball, Tobias Harris and Furkan Korkmaz led the way in the fourth as they dropped 10 and 11 points respectively. The Sixers were able to outscore the Pacers 31-8 in the final 8 minutes. This was a major win for the Sixers, as it was their first win this season that came without Joel Embiid in the lineup, as he is dealing with his back pains. But like I always say on this show, a win is a win. And after this win, an impressive win last week, the Sixers remain first in the East. As the Eagles continue to fill out their empty coaching spots, former Eagles head coach Andy Reid is preparing his Chiefs for yet another Super Bowl. Let's hope that the Frank Wright coaching tree is as rewarding to the Eagles as Andy Reid's coaching tree was. Speaking of Nick Sirianni, guess where he's been shopping for new coaches for his staff? If you guessed the Indianapolis Colts, well then you'll be right on. The Eagles have hired tight end coach Jason Michael to the same position for the Eagles. Sirianni also grabbed Colts passing game coordinator Kevin Pilato to work the same position for the Eagles. The Eagles were nice enough to give former passing game coordinator and QB coach Press Taylor to the Colts. So at least they have someone from the Eagles staff. With all of these hires behind him, Sirianni finally faced the Philadelphia media for the first time. His 1-hour-long interview gave Philly fans a glimpse of what to expect for the future. Sure, Sirianni stumbled over a few words, but that's no big deal. In my eyes, I care more about what the 39-year-old coach can do on the field more than what he says to the media. I mean, arguably the two greatest coaches in the NFL today are notoriously bad during interviews. Don't forget, a win is a win, and you can only record wins and losses on the field. A win is always a win, and Philadelphia secured a lot of these last week. That's all for the DAC Recap. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram. Tune in next week for yet another recap.
Hi, I'm Lizzy Friedman, this is Inside Ambition, and you're on 34th and Art, where we talk all things arts and entertainment in and around Drexel University. This week, we're looking at Drexel sculptures. We've all seen them. The horses outside the DAC, that ghost-looking marble slab on Race Lawn that some have coined the Stoner's Lounge, if you know what I mean. And even AJ Drexel himself, sitting outside LeBeau Hall, staring down at you because he knows you just failed your final. Well, they're all sculptures, and they're all meticulously placed and created by artists. But what do they mean? Who designed them all? Why are they here? Well, let me tell you. Our beloved Mario the Magnificent statue has been grazing the corner of 33rd and Market Street since 2002 in all of his brazen bronze glory. The statue was made by artist Eric Berg, who we found out upon creation of this episode recently passed away in April of 2020. The list of bad things in 2020 just keeps on growing. It wasn't COVID related though. But Mario isn't the only outdoor art exhibit in Philly, or even on campus. Next time you pass Haggerty Library, look up. You might notice artist George Ricky's 2 open triangle-leaning gyratory. That's the name. It's a kinetic sculpture moving in the wind, though I wouldn't call it that because that's kind of weird. I'm gonna call it 2 triangles above the library. Yeah, that sounds better. The Flame of Knowledge, the so-called fountain outside North Hall, is actually the original Drexel shaft. Like, no kidding, it was called that. Running Free is a sculpture of the 3 horses outside the DAC. It was installed in 1975 after the official renaming of the former Physical Education Athletic Center. I think I like the DAC better. Rolls off the tongue nicely. These are the only horses on campus, as the Drexel equestrian team has to make its way to the suburbs for practice. On Lancaster Walk, view the rusting balanced split discs out behind Nesbitt Hall. There's abstract, and then there's whatever this is. Also, that name kind of gives it away. If you're looking for more sculptures, safely, off campus, there's also a bunch on Penn's. All along Locust Walk, there's plenty of statues, some of them historic and some of them absolutely terrifying. But there's plenty of my favorite founding father, Benny Franks. Benjamin Franklin. And just a short walk from campus is one of Philly's most famous statues, the Rocky statue. Originally created for Rocky III, Sylvester Stallone's image remains one of the top tourist attractions in all of Philly. The Rocky statue has been in Philly since 2006, after Stallone donated it back to the city of Philadelphia. because we need it more than anyone else. Duh. And in Center City, of course, we have the famous Love Park sculpture made by Robert Indiana, as well as the clothespin just across the street. And for a nice little throwback, here's my parents in 1990 visiting Philly for the first time ever in front of those very same sculptures. Little did they know they would sprout a proud little Philadelphian, and little do they know that I'm showing you guys these pictures, so don't tell them. Thank you. So, now you'll know the background of all these lovely sculptures on your strolls throughout campus and throughout the city. Let us know in the comments down below which Drexel/Philly sculpture is your favorite and why. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Inside Ambition, for all the latest. Thanks for joining me here on 34th and Art. See you next time right here at the same address. Bye!
Hey Dragons, it's Paige here with your weekly Thunder Index, where we discuss all things science, storms, stars, and sustainability. Per usual, let's head into this next week of weather. We had quite the snowstorm this past weekend, didn't we? It's going to remain cold this week, with the highs reaching about 41 degrees and the lows reaching 11 degrees. There will be a mix of precipitation this following week, with some rain during the week and some snow possibly this weekend. Watch out, as the rain may turn into ice as frigid temperatures are to follow. And if you missed out on Groundhog's Day, Phil the Groundhog predicted 6 more weeks of winter. If this week sets the precedent for the month, it looks like we will for sure have a snowy, blowy February. Now moving up in the sky and into the stars, let's recap on the last week of astrology and what it means for you. Last Thursday afternoon, the moon is full when the sun in Aquarius opposes a full moon in Leo. The full moon is a time of culmination and promise of fulfillment. It is an emotional time, a time of romance and relationships. This Leo-Aquarius polarity deals with all that is impersonal in Leo and personal in Aquarius. The energy of the Leo full moon is creative self-expression and a boost to the individual ego. This full moon urges us to strike a balance between friendships and relationships, as well as expressing ourselves in personal and impersonal ways. This full moon occurs when the sun aligns with Jupiter, lending us optimism and courage to pursue what's in our hearts. These new feelings and revelations are emotional ones. As you may notice, there is a sense of emotion bursting through our consciousness. It's time to express yourself and let things out of your system. Over the next coming weeks, you will definitely see what this means to you. But for now, we can't just sit on our feelings, we need to express them. Of course, we may want to exercise some care while doing so, knowing that these feelings may not particularly be rational yet. Now heading back down to earth, let's check in on our dragons and the COVID numbers from the past week. Last week's numbers mark the first week of mandatory testing among in-person students, faculty, and all students living on campus. And I do have to say, amazing job, dragons. Last week, the week of January 24th, Drexel performed 3,370 tests, with only 34 coming back positive. This leaves us with only 1% of positive tests, which is the lowest amount of positive tests in Drexel's record. Now, this is most likely because a larger number of students were being tested, but let's keep those numbers down, dragons. As always, dragons, mask up and always contact Student Health Services at the number below should you feel sick or if you think you are exposed. The number is 215-220-4700. While we're here on Earth, let's talk about sustainability. Drexel Sustainability is hosting a seminar tonight from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. The Green Infrastructure, Climate, and City Seminar will feature hosts speaking on an environmental justice campaign located in North Brooklyn. This seminar, Environmental Justice in New York City Addressing Toxic Air in North Brooklyn, is the second of a 3-part series on environmental justice in the Northeast. Head over to Drexel's Climate and Sustainability website to register for the Zoom meeting, and I'll see you there. While we're on the topic of going green, here is Paige's Plant of the Week, a new segment of our show. These featured plants are all sustainable indoor and outdoor plants that help keep our air clean. For our first ever Plant of the Week, we chose the dragon tree. otherwise known as the Dracaena marginata. With a leaf color that ranges from green to purple, this plant would be a gorgeous addition to your plants indoors or outdoors. It would also fit right in at the office as it can tolerate low amounts of light. And that concludes all of these storms, stars, and sustainability I have for you this week. It's always thundering in Philadelphia, Dragons. See you next week. Thanks for watching.
Hey there, Dragons, and welcome back to Drexel Update on Inside Ambition. My name is Eva, and today I'm here with Brandon Martinez and Liz Pham from Ain't That Something podcast show. But before we get started, I wanted to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe down below to our brand new YouTube channel. And to stay most up to date on our information, make sure you follow us on Instagram at inside_ambition. Now, let's get started. Hi, Brandon and Liz, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is going to be a really exciting segment. So just to get started, why don't you guys introduce yourselves and a little bit what your podcast is about?
Liz, how about you go first?
All right, I'm Liz Pham. I am the co-host of the Ain't That Something podcast. I am a fourth year accelerated degree student in communications and PR.
I am also communications and PR. I am a fourth year graduating senior. And so I will be graduating with my dual BA and MS in public communication this coming spring. So it's pretty exciting about that. Our podcast is essentially a free therapy. As simple as that sounds, we started this podcast as like an interview show. Well, I started as an interview show, and then believe it or not, my first 3 episodes were me just trying to figure out who I wanted to have as a co-host. And Liz blew it out of the park. She was already a friend of mine. So, but this brought us totally closer together, and we use this podcast as a platform to express how we are feeling and express our deepest thoughts, both good and bad, because, it's 21st century, it's 2021, and we can't be happy all the time,
Yeah, our brand has kind of evolved since then. I think Brandon initially told me when I was a guest on the show, the podcast was mostly like a way to connect with his friends and build closer relationships, especially during COVID. But now, like, he's like transformed into like free therapy. As we brought on more guests, we found out how they liked our podcast just to talk about some of their problems being a college student that necessarily they don't get to talk about with other people. And I really appreciate that, because I think these issues need to be expressed and aired and not be so taboo.
It's important to show the transparency.
That's so great. Thank you so much. I can hear the passion behind what you're doing in your project. So what's the significance between your podcast name and how did you jump into that podcast world? It's such a big market right now.
So originally, this podcast was called The Last Call with a man named Armand. He graduated last year and he needed somebody to take over his show, And so he said, Brandon, I like the way you talk and carry yourself. So would you like to be on would you like to take over my podcast? I was like, absolutely. But is it okay if I make it my own? And he said, you can do with it whatever you want. I need a predecessor. And I was like, predecessor?
Yes.
Yeah, predecessor. Is that the right word? No.
I
need a successor.
There we go.
So I said, absolutely. So what happened was I was thinking about different kind of names for like a long time. And I was like, you know what? Whatever happens, happens. And I was thinking about it. How many times have you ever had an ain't that something moment? Like when you're sitting there and you see like a squirrel grab a piece of toast from the trash can and run across the street. Ain't that something? So I started out this podcast with just interviewing some different friends and just trying to get that ain't that something moment out of it. But then it like transformed to what it is now, where we're hardcore mental health and self-love.
That's great. So what's your ain't that something moment that you've had recently that has been like your favorite one?
Ooh, Liz, you want to go first?
Oh gosh. I think the last podcast we recorded was with our friend Gab Dondici, and like I mentioned earlier, that our ain't that something moment didn't really happen on the podcast, but like afterwards, me and Brandon kind of reflected how much our brand has changed and how much of an impact we have made. It may not show in numbers of viewership because me and Brandon always make a joke about how we're quote unquote successful or how debatable our success is. But I think on a personal level, we have been really successful with our podcast. Like the people we bring on an interview seem to like really like the opportunity to speak about their feelings. And I've noticed personally myself throughout our 2 seasons we have recorded, my articulation and verbal articulation has gotten so much better. So there have been like smaller wins for us, not necessarily shown in our analytics, but
And for me, I think during the podcast, I got sober during the latter half of our first season. And so my Ain't That Something moment was like, wow, like I really use this platform to talk about how I'm feeling and connect my personal issues to other people, you know, because it wasn't just me that was going through it affected everybody else around me. So like it increased my relationship with Liz and then the people that were on our team. So that's most definitely an Ain't That Something moment, you know, like, wow, this podcast helped me get sober. Ain't that something?
Yeah. That's amazing. And you know what? You say debatable success, but I've listened to your podcast and I think it's amazing. And hopefully from seeing this, people will listen more. Now, speaking of your podcast episodes, some of your quarantine episodes featured some Red Lobster rolls baking, macaroon baking. Do you have any other future plans to incorporate some other of your talents into your podcast?
Oh.
See, that would require other talents. So no, well, I know Brandon has a band that he wanted to revamp. I don't know.
So I have a band from high school. We were called St. Perry's Way. It's based off of the street I was on, but I think it'd be really cool to get them on the show, and that would just be like just kind of like my 2 different worlds coming together. But that'll be definitely a season 3 problem to figure out. Not a problem, but that's definitely something we can figure out during season 3. Yeah, I think in terms of our talents, we've really gotten better with articulation, as you can tell. Through this, you might not be able to tell with me actually, but and as well as our ability to be way more outgoing. Because I remember when we were first doing this podcast, we weren't very we were pretty reserved about it, and then it took a while, but we finally got into the swings of things. So I think we're using our talents every time we record.
Yeah, we've built a dynamic, because I remember in the first season, every time we would record, we'd have to like pause halfway through and be like, what should we talk about next? I have no idea what to talk about. But I think now that we've like built our friendship outside of the podcast and with the podcast, we can easily get a conversation going. And I think our interview skills have been doing well too. Mostly Brandon. I applaud to him because he just knows how to keep me back on track, because I ramble all the time.
And I think that dynamic, like Liz says, is very important. Like you can have a co-host and you guys can be good on the show, but if you don't have that life outside of the show, then it's not going to be as good. Like your ability to connect with each other during the show isn't going to be there.
No, that's awesome. And thank you so much for coming. If dragons want to hear more, where should they go?
You can follow us on SoundCloud, on Instagram at ain'tthat_something. You can also hear us on Spotify, Apple Music, and on the tripod section on the Triangle.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dragons. That's all I have for you. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe down below. And to stay up to date, follow us on Instagram at inside_ambition. See you next week.
Bye, guys.